Great. So we will be recording today's session. We always record the Unlearning Labs so that a lot of people who are not able to be here because of time zone and other reasons are able to participate and look at them later. So if you're not okay with the recording and do not want to have yourself on camera, then you can stay off camera. Which is just to let people know we are recording today's session. So welcome. I am Gunjan Veda from the Movement for Community-Led Development, and it is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome all of you to next in the series of the Unlearning Labs on Community-Led Monitoring and Evaluation. The Unlearning Labs were a space that we designed, the movement designed, and we launched them in 2022. And this was because we realized that if we're really talking about transforming the system that we have been working in, if we really need to transform our ways of thinking, being, and doing, then it requires us to unlearn a lot of what we have been taught, right? Whether it's about who is an expert, what is knowledge, what is rigor, where does knowledge sit, what counts as, what counts as quality, all of these notions we need to unlearn in order to think about this from a more decolonial perspective. So that was the intention with which the movement launched the Unlearning Labs in 2022. When we launched the Unlearning Labs, we asked all of you, and in fact, we asked all our members, what would they like to focus on? And the number one topic that came up was actually community-led monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And so last year, we began this series on community-led monitoring, evaluation, and learning in the Unlearning Labs. As I mentioned earlier, the Unlearning Labs are designed as a space for us to unlearn. If we can go to the next slide, Ronald. Thank you. So the Unlearning Labs are designed as a space for us to unlearn a lot of what we have been taught about, a lot of the technical issues that we deal with in the course of our work. So the first Unlearning Labs were on strategic planning. And we looked at what would strategic planning look like from a community-led perspective. This Learning Lab series is on community-led monitoring, evaluation, and learning, right? So the whole idea behind that is unlearning, but it is also mutual capacity strengthening. The Unlearning Labs are built on the belief that each one of us brings with them a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge, lived experience. And when we pull it together, that's when real learning happens. We learn from each other, with each other, and what we create is made greater than the sum of what we put in, right? And that's how the Unlearning Labs have been designed. So really, the spirit of the Unlearning Labs is your participation. It is extremely important in the Unlearning Labs that all of us participate fully, that we share our thoughts, we share our experience, we share our ideas, because that's what creates the series. There are no right or wrong answers in this. We are all learning together, and we are all learning from and with each other in this. We want to not just challenge our ideas around knowledge and where it sits. We also want to challenge the ideas around how knowledge is created, generated, and transmitted. Because in the Unlearning Labs, we really firmly believe that knowledge is created when a group of people come together and pool together their lived experience. So that's what the Unlearning Labs are about. We please use the chat throughout this Unlearning Labs, because when there are quite a few people, it becomes slightly tricky if everybody wants to unmute and speak at the same time. We have simultaneous French interpretation, so if you are a French speaker, please use the interpretation channel. You can also use captions in different languages. They are available for the session. If we can go to the next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, I want to do a quick recap of what the series has been before I hand it over to our facilitators for today. So today we have the privilege of having some people who've been really committed to the idea of community-led monitoring, learning, and evaluation. We have Ronald Kimambo from Firelight Foundation and Hapunda, who is from impact managers and the University of Zambia. They will be supported by Kevin Obura from the Firelight Foundation and Justin Chimangeni from GASO in Malawi. So this team is really going to help facilitate the space today to enable us to think differently about how we do monitoring evaluation. But before that, a very quick recap of what we've covered in the series so far. And what is CoMEL, right? And what makes it different from regular monitoring and evaluation? The first and most important thing that makes community-led monitoring and evaluation different from other forms of evaluation is in terms of power, ownership, right? It's not extractive. It's not about going and getting information from the community to fulfill our learning needs, our accountability needs, our needs of satisfying a funder. Community-led monitoring and evaluation are really about community members deciding what it is that they want to learn alongside the implementing organizations and working with them to get information that will enable them to adapt their work, to be able to meet their visions and goals. So the three characteristics of CoMEL are: it is community-driven, it is participatory, and it is action-oriented. It's not just for curiosity or to fill a funder report. It is in order to bring about change in the community and the way that the work is happening in the community. If we go to the next slide, please. So community-led MEL is not extractive, right? If you can do a series of 5 clicks, Ronald. So what we had seen in the first few parts of the series was, the first part of the series was really about MEL 101. So a lot of us believe that we are not MEL professionals. It's something extremely technical and niche, and that we can't do it. So the first session in this series was about debunking that myth and about looking at how a lot of MEL is really common sense. It is stuff that we do in our everyday. We just don't call it MEL, and we just don't realize that this is a methodology. But we do have a logic to what we do. The second part of the CoMEL series looked at this. What is the CoMEL cycle? What is the definition of CoMEL? So it was CoMEL 101. And we looked at how at every stage in the CoMEL cycle, what does it look like when the community actually takes leadership? We also looked at the concept of CLD congruent MEL and how it differs from CoMEL and traditional MEL, right? And this here is a cycle, if some of you were part of that series, you will remember that we looked at. And the rest of this series was really about going into each of these steps to understand, well, what does it look like when you're trying to do, when you're trying to decide the purpose of the evaluation, when you're trying to frame the learning questions, when you're trying to create a theory of change with the community. Last session, we looked at the theory of change and how do we create a theory of change with community members. And in today's session, we are going to look at learning questions and framing indicators, or another term for it, which is science of success, because again, indicators makes it sound very technical. But with this very quick introduction and recap to what this series is, what we have covered so far, and where we intend to go with it, I would like to hand it over, Ronald, to you and Given to take us through this session, which is on learning questions and indicators. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gunjan, for that background and context, and really supporting participants to reflect on the journey so far. So let me start by just saying, for this particular process to happen smoothly, we need to have an enabling environment throughout the process. And if we are talking about meaningful community engagement, if we are talking about meaningful co-creation of these processes, then we need to start with having, asking ourselves, how can consent be obtained in a way that really builds trust? And here we are not even going to details about the learning questions or indicators, but we are trying to really look at the context, look at the environment, look at the community stakeholders that we're working with moving forward, and looking at the environment that these communities are coming from. how can we really build a trust from the word go, so that they feel that they are leading the process rather than being subjected as, being involved in this process while the process has really taken off. How do we really think through to work like the way these communities work? How can we feel that we are working in solidarity rather than, working with them while they realize that we are at different levels in terms of power dynamics? But again, we need to think through who are the stakeholders to bring on board to ensure that there's a meaningful community-led establishment of these learning questions and indicators. Who do we think is quite vocal in this community? Who are the good gatekeepers? Who are the government authorities in this particular aspect? What about the traditional leaders? What about the key, the people who are central to this particular process? I shy away from using beneficiary because it might sound as if they only benefit, but who are the individuals that are central to this whole process? Is it youth? And how are they brought on board? Is it children? How are they brought on board to feel that they are really on board from the word go? What techniques are you using or putting in place in order to really make sure that they participate fully in this particular process? But again, as Gunjan said, how do you avoid jargons? How do we simplify? How do you pitch this language or tone it down to the level that they can feel something that they can engage comfortably? How can you define this kind of science of success with these communities? How do you co-create and work with the communities to do this? What matters most to them is quite critical. Do you really simplify this or come in as an expert with a lot of jargons and then you really put off people from the word go? But apart from that, how do we enhance community-led processes rather than a community-based process? Because there's a difference in this particular aspect. And I was really perusing some of the questions that were really shared by participants of this particular session as they were registering. Some of them wanted to understand the difference between community-led and community-based. In this particular aspect, you need to think through in a way that community stakeholders and various individuals that are quite critical in this particular process, they feel that they're leading the process rather than feeling that, okay, this is an external part that came in here and they involved us on ABC, but we still feel that this is externally driven. So there's that huge difference. They need to feel that they are really leading the process. They are determined that these are the issues. And looking at the Malin scenario that we'll go through later on, you realize that these were concerned citizens who came together to say, we have an issue in terms of our own community's health. How do we unpack this issue? What do we envision? How do we envision our community in future? What are kind of outcomes that we need to really embrace moving forward? But again, who are the players to be brought on board and can ensure credibility of the whole process of really identifying learning questions and indicators that we're going to measure moving forward? Is it bringing on board some consultants who are coming in with some expertise, but they understand the participatory processes and they listen to the communities? Do we need to bring on board organizations that are within these communities? They are bringing the community agency within the process. Do we need to bring in the individuals or that are quite central to the process? If it's an initiative or project related to children, do we bring on board children themselves? If it's about youth, do we bring youth at the forefront? How are they involved in this particular process to make this whole particular process credible moving forward? So this is really some sort of a scenario that we need to set well in advance before trying to figure out how the learning questions might be established, or how do we really identify the indicators moving forward. So I'll pause here for a while to invite Sarah. Sarah will tease us with some two questions to really understand what is our thinking when we hear learning questions, and what is our thinking when we hear indicators. Sarah, over to you to support us with that. And I might share my screen for a while.
Thank you so much, Ronald. Yeah, we're gonna do a little participatory exercise now. I hope you can see my screen. I have a Padlet that we want to get you all thinking about. Let me see, how do I share the Padlet? Okay, I'll put the link in the show if you're able to access it. Otherwise, Gunjan, maybe you can take over while I figure out how to share it better. Is anyone able to open that link and add to the Padlet? We'd like you to think about first, how do you define learning questions and indicators in one sentence? And once you open the Padlet, you should be able to just click to add a post and then type as many thoughts as you have and add them to our Padlet, and we'll all see. And if you're not able to open it, you can also put your ideas in the chat and one of us will transfer them over. Looks
Thank
like
you,
we
Sarah.
have some people who are able to open it.
Yeah, I was able to open it. Hopefully people will be able to open it too. Again, if you're not able to open it, don't worry, it's perfectly fine. Put it in the chat box. But the idea here is, again, co-creation. So we want to understand, how do each of us view these questions? What comes to mind when we're thinking of terms like learning questions and indicators? What do they mean to us? I see people are beginning to type. That's perfect. And if you're more comfortable speaking rather than typing in chat or on the Padlet, you can also raise your hands. We know different people have different modes of communication that they prefer. So. If you're a French speaker, please feel free to use the French columns in the questions. Again, you just need to add, and you can type in French, either in the chat or on the Padlet directly. Again, our Francophone participants, please feel free to either speak in French, type in French on the Padlet, or directly in the chat here. We will put it on the Padlet for you.
We have a raised hand.
Oh, okay. Yes, please go ahead. Yeshitala Desta. I hope I'm saying. Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't write. I tried to put some comments on the text. So yeah, regarding the methods, we have a community-led program in Ethiopia as a Canadian Feed the Children. So what we used to do is we used an approach called community-based baseline mapping and then target setting. So the communities, we help the communities to identify, like as we develop the theory of change together. Once we identified each preconditions and the steps, then at each step we stop and ask where we are. Then how can the community indicate where they are using different symbols and like pictures, like cups, like small seedlings and things like that. So they use where they are and define why they say they are at that step. And then they set a target for certain time ahead, like a year, 2 year, based on the visions for each identified action areas. So that is how we work with them. Then later on, it is not us who measure, since it is their own indicator and their own target, we agree with them on a regular basis to measure those indicators and then where they are. For example, if they plan to increase some aspect of life, like for example, there is a child enrollment by 30% at the end of 2025, then by the end of 2025, they sit together and measure that indicator. So that is how we are implementing a community-led baseline process and also the M&E. The other is there is also a regular forum where the community come together and review their status in terms of the goal. What is working well, what's not working, and what should be done, what should be adjusted so that they can move forward. This is a kind of a semi-annual process where the different stakeholders are involved in the community. So everybody who has a role in that aspect would revise their own actions so that the community will move forward to achieve their visions and goals. So just to add that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is super helpful. Given and Ronald, maybe I'll hand it over to you if you want to go through the responses that people have put in the chat and then take from there on the Padlet and then take it from there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gunjan. Yes, I see a lot of responses trying to define learning questions and indicators and also various methods that participants are envisioning in terms of engaging the communities and some typical kind of examples. And I hope we'll get some translation of the French version as well. Given you would like to say a word before I now dive into unpacking indicators and learning questions?
Not really. I think that we're on the right track with the responses, most of the responses that we are getting. Thank you. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Sarah, can you allow me? I know some colleagues continue to share, but can you allow me to share my screen? Yeah.
Yeah, Ronald, can I quickly just suggest that maybe if you can do a very quick roundup of some of the common threads that are emerging from what people have typed so that you can tie it what you're saying just to see how similar or different the perspectives are, that would be super helpful.
Sure. Sarah, can you share your screen again so I can go through that? Yes, so starting with the learning question, there's a response there that one referring to an experience change for the individual, easy to understand and measurable. And I think someone's talking about relevant and authentic, clear and complete. I don't know that whether it's making reference to the indicator. Needs to be something that is measurable and actionable. And I think they're making reference to the indicator. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then open questions to explore what has happened. I really like that response because it's basically trying to understand an unknown, through going back to the very same community members or stakeholders within the space to really unpack those particular issues. There's another response showing that learning questions indicators are tools used to measure success or failure. And I'll add there, I think a learning question might not be used to measure, but rather to understand. the unknown, to understand what is behind certain kind of situation, how that happened, what are the reasons behind it. Could go further really to understand even the root causes of the major problem that we see at the surface. But again, dialogue among identified stakeholders, this could be referring to the learning question, trying really to interact with stakeholders to understand some of the issues that face them. And indicator measures change, I think Gunjan referred to that when we called a signs of success, could be a sign of regress, could be giving an indication whether you are achieving that particular progress, etc. When it comes to the methods highlighted there, I can see that there's an understanding of root causes by using participatory methods there. That's interesting, how you do engage communities in a way that they feel that they're part and parcel of the process. There's an aspect response there asking how community members envision success. Yes, you can ask them, but how do you engage them? Are you asking them in which particular kind of platform? How do you initiate that particular kind of engagement? I think is where we are going to unpack further. Prioritizing what is important to the community, whether learning questions or indicators. Yeah, but again, how do you engage? How do you interact? In which particular platform? How do you really fit within their own ways of interacting for them to feel comfortable to share? And imagine even if you are working some of the communities that are having high literacy rate. So how are you going to do that? Then use the problem tree. I really like that really to unpack what are the root causes, or what are the solutions that we are putting in the particular process, and ask how community members envision success. So I think that's some few responses that I've gone through. But again, in my next slide, I can unpack further what do we mean by that, and also really to ground that when it comes to indigenous ways of doing this, as well as we navigate different spaces. Gunjan and Given, do you have any particular addition before I move forward?
No, thank you, Ronald. That was very helpful, to just hear what everybody was saying, and also you're putting it into context. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Sarah, can you allow me to share my screen? Right, so going back to my slide. So what is a learning question? And as I was going through some of your responses, I think we are within the very same track largely, because learning questions are basically the way you inquire, you phrase a question that intends to inquire about or explore about a certain particular issue of interest within your project or your work. And really, that particular, you are pushed to have a learning question whereby you realize you don't have sufficient information to move forward. You don't know, you don't understand fully the scenario, the situation. You don't understand fully the problem, I want to unpack that particular problem, and you need to be quite organized in terms of how do you phrase that particular question, and how do you really want to figure out about that. I can give a quick example there before we go to the examples. In one of our initiatives in Malawi, after conducting a baseline study, findings came back whereby we realized that community leaders at the grassroots level, they were quite aware of children's rights. They could even mention at least 5 rights, children's rights within their own context, which are in line with various conventions, national and international conventions. But what was shocking to us in that particular baseline study or kind of findings is that despite having high level or high level of knowledge when it comes to understanding rights of children, within the past 12 months, none of the community leaders took an action to really address the challenges that children were facing. We asked these leaders that with very high level knowledge of, in terms of children's rights, whether they took any particular action, either to protect children or to rescue children, for instance, from child marriages. And none of them, could recall any particular action that they took. So for us, that was an entry point to figure out, here we're having a learning question. We need to learn. We need to understand, why are we having this particular kind of disjoint between having a high level of knowledge that doesn't translate into action or to their practice? What kind of gap are we having here? What is not happening? What needs to happen to make sure that this particular kind of high knowledge is translated into taking action? Because the community leaders, they're within a position where they can take action. They can really enforce the bylaws, which were also there to make sure that children are protected or children are rescued from the child marriages. And that was one particular angle. So you can realize from that particular kind of example that a learning question can happen throughout the project cycle. Wherever you reflect, wherever you go through data sets, wherever you go through the situation and realize, there's nothing here that I don't understand well, then I need to figure out how best can I inquire or explore about this particular aspect. But again, so some of these questions that I think you might also interact with as you are going through the Malindi scenario could be like, what are the main factors contributing to the obesity among Malindi residents? And I think if you have gone through that particular scenario, Malindi scenario, you realize that they were really facing challenges. One of the health challenges that we're facing was obesity. But you might need to understand, before doing any particular intervention there, you might need to understand what are the main factors contributing to obesity among Malindi residents. But again, how does access to health food options impact dietary habits in the community? This might be related to the obese. Obesity is one of the particular kind of health challenges that they are facing, and we're trying to really explore what are the issues behind, but also what are the barriers to accessing mental health services, because mental health was one of the challenges that the Malindi community people were facing. So you can figure out, I know there's a lot of questions that by looking at that particular scenario that you can figure out a question that can look like the way I shared there, or they can look different based on how you want to phrase them, based on how you want to inquire about this particular question. You can have a lot of sub-questions here or prompts to really probe along the way, and moving forward, you can really figure out based on my kind of questions, what kind of techniques of data collection I might need to put in place. Is it a focus group discussion? Is it an in-depth interview or key informant interview, because I need some expert in there moving forward? But basically, the example I gave about our situation in Malawi, within the Ending Child Marriage project, but again, looking at the Malindi scenario, this is the kind of questions that you can really think through. And basically, they are meant to give you further information that will really inform your thought process, will really inform your next step moving forward. But when we are talking about when you're talking about indicators, let's think of indicators as traffic lights, right? When you are getting to the junction, then there's a traffic light. When you see a red, that shows you are required to stop. When you see yellow, it's waiting, either you wait for a red to appear, or it's amber, sorry, they said men are colorblind. So that's amber, not yellow. So when you see amber, it's a wait whether you're supposed to stop or to go, move ahead. When you see green, it's an indication that we need to move forward. So basically, indicators, as trying to simplify that, of course, they are measurable variables or metrics that reflect if we are looking at the process or performance or outcomes or the end goal in a way, but it's some sort of a sign, signal, or mark that really tells you where you are in terms of your project. Are you really making good progress? Are you regressing? there are tangible evidence and signals of change. You really need to substantiate, and this is what I was making reference to when we were talking about credibility. And they need to really give you some sort of tangible evidence and clear signals of change. Could be a positive change, could be a negative change. All this will really inform you on how do you really to move forward, but also allow you to effectively track and evaluate your efforts moving forward. And you can also simplify it by calling a sign of either progress, regress, or success. Because sometimes when you're using indicator, might sound as if a jargon, could be quite intimidating to some individuals who are part and parcel of the process, but they are not really L&D experts or specialists moving forward. But again, as we are really unpacking these indicators and referring back to the Malindi scenario, some of the examples could be, if you're talking about obesity, what are the percentages of residents with the body mass index above the health range, and there are usually those particular kind of ranges in there. Another indicator to access health food, as again, we're trying to really understand what do they take. The number of grocery stores offering fresh produce within a 2-kilometer radius of residential areas. You're trying to imagine that for them to really be able to move forward, they might need to access this kind of fresh produce. It needs to be within their 2-kilometer radius. But again, an indicator for mental health services could be, wait times for appointments at the local counseling centers, because if they wait for a long time or there's a longer duration in terms of waiting for appointments, it might discourage individuals to really access counseling services. So, and that might also contribute to the bad state of mental health as well as moving forward. So these are kind of the examples that might really extract. There are different types of indicators from the input level, output level, outcome level, impact level. I don't want really to dive into that at the moment because that might be, a huge kind of discussion on its own. But there are also different levels of indicators, like, are you talking about individual level? Are you talking about community level kind of indicators and so forth? So pretty much this is what I wanted to share with regard to that. But again, let's remember that in some of these contexts that we work, we are working with communities that they have their own way of thinking. They have their own way of unpacking the context. And sometimes we are caught up in the middle because we're supposed to report to our funders. And at the same time, we need to embrace community-led kind of process moving forward. So in such kind of scenario, you really need to be quite thoughtful in terms of how do you set indicators for the communities to still feel relevant, to still feel that the way you define these indicators, the way you measure those makes a lot of sense to them. And thanks to Gunjan, I think she shared with us an example from Guatemala, whereby when you are looking at child mortality, for the community, for them, an easy way to track whether they're making progress or not is to count graves in a certain period of time. Let's say within the past 12 months, how many new graves are we having here? Are they 10? Are they 15? And then comparing to the previous year's kind of period. Last year, probably we had 25 new graves in that particular period. But this time around, we have only 5 new graves. What does that tell the community? Tell that now at the moment, we are having fewer deaths among our children in this particular aspect. And that can give them a better sense. So it may sound to be a little bit awkward to count graves, but for them, it's a simplistic way to really track whether they're making progress or not. It makes a lot of sense for them because they can evidently say, these are the graves that we had last year, and these are the graves that we have this year. Which graves are, which particular kind of graves are many or fewer? And that can tangibly translate into the kind of progress they are making or the kind of regress that is in that particular process. But again, they are also talking about how do we engage communities. There are different ways. We really need to simplify, not only thinking about focus group discussions or interviews. Sometimes in some of the communities, they might be intimidated by a lot of papers. They can be intimidated by, seeing research assistants who are coming with pens and papers in there, realizing that probably they are not educated or the literacy rates are very high. And then for them, they might really block you off. They might, they might really close in terms of any particular kind of interaction. So we have learned over the year that there are various cultural oral ways of transmitting knowledge or discussing, engaging communities now to feel that they're taking lead in terms of identifying and establishing learning questions and indicators. For instance, in Botswana, they're using a bonfire method because they sit around, elders will sit around fire during the evening hours, and for them, they can really open. They can talk about what they think in a more comfortable manner. So we really need to think on gathering data and making sure that they are really in the process in a way that they think is right. But also the other traditional ways of seeking consent. For instance, the very same scenario in Botswana, for them to show you that they've consented to that particular process, or they've invited you to their community or to that particular sitting, they give a dancing reto. It's like appreciation that you are now one of us. You can sit down and talk to us. And for them coming in there and giving them paper to sign, it might not work because probably they don't know how to write, to read and write, and it doesn't work for them. But how do you secure that particular kind of consent in a way that works for them? It's quite critical. But again, how do you sit in within their own kind of own conversation? Like, sitting with them, conversation over coffee by a tree. In Tanzania, with a project there whereby you need to find elders sitting, having coffee. How do you engage them? How do you make them relax? How do you make sure that they are feeling that they are relaxed? They are speaking to you like the way they are talking about any other kind of story. They need to feel comfortable. They need to feel that we are talking about real issues. There's no any kind of raised expectation. There are no any kind of, telling you what you want to hear moving forward. So that is quite critical. And before I move forward and hand over to Given, we have one of our colleagues from GASO, Malawi. Justin, I don't know whether you are still there. If you can really share with us in 5 minutes the experience that you had during the process of establishing learning questions, but also identifying indicators of progress during that particular aspect. Justin, you're on mute in case you're trying to speak. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ronald. Yeah, very true. And maybe just to start with, the process that we went through, we actually mobilized the community to, we conducted a community mapping in our community where we had a series of activities. And the most common one was the community dialogues, because we had to meet different stakeholders at different times and realizing the power dynamics within the communities. We made sure that we have we gather information from all sorts of people in our community. Are you hearing me?
Yes, loud and clear, Justin. Just go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So during the community dialogue meetings that we had, we underwent different kind of scenarios, or we actually had questions that we were trying to design the project that we had on ending child marriages, trying to find out whether child marriages was really a problem in the community, and once they understood and agreed that that was the main problem, that's why they thought of partnering with international organizations through GASO, so that we actually kept this malpractice. So yeah, one thing that came out very clear was that when you are interacting with communities, you really have to make sure that you are very flexible. And most of the times, language becomes the barrier. to getting the necessary information that you need from communities. So by working with GASO, which also from the same community, made by, is composed of the members of the same community and their own children, the language issue now become a relief to them because we use the same language. And when we were having different stakeholders in different places, some of the questions that we actually wanted to we put forward so that we unearth. These questions were developed from whatever we were getting from the communities. All the information that we got from the communities would lead to us maybe having these questions. And surely the questions were actually emanated from the discussions that we had. And I remember having some issues that were being raised by the community, like issues of children abusing drugs, issues to do with men that were not even attending. When you invite a meeting in a community, you see that most of the participants will be women, not necessarily the men. Men are like sending women all the time because mostly they think that's what they know, that maybe such community meetings could only be done by women. And sometimes we also had the issues of to do with parental care. Now, to make sure that we get to the bottom of these issues, we really had to prompt or to ask them open questions, open-ended questions, like what is it that we'll do to maybe fight to make sure that our children are not abusing drugs. So they would bring in suggestions as the solution towards that problem. And when you want to find maybe an indicator or a sign of success, a sign of change towards children abusing drugs, you also ask them, you pose a question to say, what are some of the signs that we can see in future to make sure that that will indicate, that will show us that this problem is now, or we are winning against this problem. We are fighting against this problem, or maybe having no men, most men not coming to community meetings, or children abusing drugs. What is it that will show? So they will be open, very open, because it's not the kind of mere monitoring and evaluation questions that we normally have, that we normally see with professionals, where they ask questions there, and you think whether is it exactly, or even if you think of an answer, you think, is it the right answer that I'm giving them, or what are they trying to say? So with the issue of language, that also becomes difficult. But when we are interacting with them, you will see that they are very free. And that's one thing that we community workers, we need to take care of, is the issue of language and how we are presenting matters. Or it needs, at least, or the way I see, or the way I've experienced this over time, it needs a special emphasis or extra care on the side of an evaluator or somebody who is facilitating this process. You need to take your time, understand the people, put forward the language, the better language, very clear and very simple languages. You get the information, and the communities will be very much involved, and they give you exactly what you need as signs of success or indicators. I think that is one of the things that I can point out at the moment. Thank you, Ronald.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin, for sharing your journey as a GASO in Malawi within an initiative to end child marriage. I would like now to proceed. I'm conscious that we are having some limitation in terms of time. So given over to you to take us forward with some scenario setting exercise within the breakout sessions. Over to you, Given.
Thank you very much, Ronald. And hi, everyone. I'm Given Hapunda, based in Zambia, working with a consulting company, Impact Managers. So mainly we focus on helping organizations learn from their processes. And I think that to set the scene for the next exercise, I want to begin by saying that as we start looking at these scenarios, let's bear in mind that there's a difference between a learning question and a performance question. Normally in traditional evaluations, we tend to focus more on performance questions, and performance questions are more outcome or result oriented, whilst learning questions mainly focus on the process, the lessons, and the insights that we can get in every process that we do, including when we are measuring our performance itself. So the idea of, and I'm going to request that I just close my video just to make sure that my network is behaving. So the idea is that when we go in these breakout sessions, you'll be given scenarios and you can identify learning questions from the scenarios. And the other group will also identify indicators. So unfortunately, due to time, we will not be able to give you an opportunity to identify learning lessons and indicators at once. So we'll divide you into groups so that we are able to do this activity very effectively. Now, as we go in these groups, what is important is for us to collaborate and discuss. And the way the groups are right now in this call is that I think it's a perfect group because it really depicts different characteristics, and it will give you an opportunity to really experience what happens when this is done in a community-led process. When people with different characteristics, different backgrounds, but are all community members are brought together. I always like a scenario when I'm talking about community-led monitoring and evaluation where animals, all different animals are brought together and say, who do we pick? Because every animal has a specific unique characteristic, right? And that's exactly what happens in a community-led. Everyone has different characteristics, different interests, different power relations. And when they come in these sessions, you really need to have good facilitation skills to enable that every characteristic of the community is picked during the identification of learning questions and indicators. So just to set a scene on how this is going to happen is that as we begin to identify these learning questions, let's have at the back of our minds what makes a good characteristic of an effective learning question. And I think many of these you already mentioned them when we had the Padlet exercise. Number one is that an effective learning question has to be clear and concise. You can only measure something that you yourself, you are clear what it intends to measure. And it also has to be concise, right? And sometimes these words seem so simple, yet when we begin to review questions, sometimes we actually, okay, this question is not clear. So how do you make a question clear? That is very important. In other words, understand what it intends to achieve. What are the information needed in order to answer that question? And you have to be very clear about it. The next, that it has to be relevant to the objectives. Why are we doing, how is this question going to contribute to the objective of what we are doing, what we want to achieve? Is it relevant? Nowadays, because of most programs that we do are cross-cutting, we actually tend to see that a lot of questions that we develop may not necessarily be relevant, but they address certain elements that are cross-cutting to our issue. I think it's very important to focus on the relevance of our learning questions to the objectives. And I think I'll give you a little bit of guiding questions, and you see why this is important, because learning questions, just like indicators, have implication on the cost. If you're just developing learning questions just because they are interesting and so on and so forth, you actually discover that, okay, we have too much and our finances are not enough to measure that. So very important that they're really relevant to your objectives. But because we are dealing with learning questions, it's very important that they are open-ended to encourage exploration. And I think that Ronald labored on that point. A good learning question has to encourage exploration. And I like to give an analogy that for exploration is starting a journey not knowing what you are going to discover. It's like you are an explorer going somewhere where you don't know, but you have to write a tale of everything that you discovered along the way. And that's what open-ended questions are. You start not knowing what you're going to discover. By the end of the day, we want to see a tale of what you are going to discover. Then engage, they have to be engaging and thought-provoking. Okay. Next slide. Yes, and for the group that is going to look at the indicators, there are few issues that we need to focus on. Number one, they have to be measurable and observable. Ensure that you know that you have the capacity to measure an indicator. Next, make sure that they are aligned to a learning question, but also to a goal or objective, but they are also responsive to progress and understanding. Are they responsive in assessing the progress that you are making and understanding why you are making progress or not? So I think that because of time, I will not spend so much time on this slide. At this point, we'll post some guiding or prompting questions in the chat box for the group that will be assigned to identify learning questions. We have prompting questions that we have for you. And then for the group that will be identifying indicators, also prompting questions. So over to you to begin to assign the different groups.
Thanks, Given. Thank you so much, Ronald and Given and Justin. So just for everyone, you are very soon going to get an invitation to join a breakout room. What's going to happen is we are going to have 25 minutes in the breakout groups. Some breakout groups are going to be looking at the learning questions. Some of them are going to be framing indicators. Now we have a mixed group here today. Some of you have done this very often for a lot of your projects, right? And some of you have never done this before. And that's precisely the reason why we are working on this together, because as Given said, and as Ronald said, the point of this exercise is not to just frame a learning question. If you're an evaluator who's been doing this, you know how to do this. It is about framing the learning question together with different stakeholders. So it's about the collaborative process of creating indicators and learning questions so that they are meaningful to everyone, because that's what CoMEL is about, that when you're working with the community, the learning questions are not something you go and give to the community. That's something you frame with those different stakeholders so that they are meaningful for everyone. So that's the exercise that we are going through in the next 25 minutes. And that's what's different from what you would normally do as an evaluator. So we're going to come back in 25 minutes, and then we are going to have every group in 2 minutes, we are going to have one person come and speak to us. Ronald or Kevin, do you want to tell people what the person who is reporting back has to speak about? I believe they have to speak about if they found something challenging or interesting or exciting about the process, right?
Yes, so there will be where the reporter, so in each group, you need to have someone who's going to report back, and you'll be reporting on the question, what was challenging or surprising doing this exercise? What was challenging or surprising doing this exercise?
Thank you so much, Given. So yes, so again, the idea is, remember, it's the unlearning labs. So we are unlearning a lot of the traditional ways of defining learning questions, of defining indicators, and we are trying to find new ways of doing them from a community-led perspective. Sarah, can we send everyone to groups?
Yeah, the groups are open. Almost everybody should have been assigned. We do have a group staying in the main room.
Great. So there is one group that if you have not been assigned, you're in the main room with me. Otherwise, you should all get a pop-up window inviting you to a breakout group. If you are a French speaker, for some reason you find yourself in an English group, come back to the main room and I will reallocate you to the French room. And we'll come back in 25 minutes to kind of assimilate and think over what was different in this exercise and what makes CoMEL and framing indicators in CoMEL different from traditional MEL.
Thanks, Gunjan. I'm going to head to the French group.
Yeah. All right. Is there anybody who is for Francophone who is left in this room? Delphina, I'm going to send you to, okay, we will get started in this room. For those of you who are staying in the main room, please make sure if you can read the scenario, which we had posted earlier, because we are going to be working on the scenario and I'm going to repost it for all of us here. This is the scenario. If everyone can please just click on it and look at the scenario while I make sure that people who should be in their different breakout rooms are able to reach their breakout rooms. Okay, I think we have everybody who needs to be in this room. Just checking, there is nobody in this room who is a Francophone. Is there anybody in this room who is a Francophone and needs to head out? Ronald and Given, can I move you to some of the rooms to support the groups around?
Sure, sure.
Yes, please.
Okay, Ronald, I am going to move you to the learning questions room. And Given, I'm moving you to the French room. If you can just help Sarah a little bit, she will translate and ask you.
Right.
Okay, great. Awesome. With that, welcome everyone. So I hope everybody has had a chance to look at the scenario. I will share my screen and pull it up here just in case. Give me a second so that I can pull it up. Here we go. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, so this is the scenario. And what we are going to be doing is we are going to be framing indicators. So we are the indicators group. So we're going to be framing indicators for a CoMEL project based on this scenario. So we will assume that we are different parts of a community. So you can take up different roles that you think of in a community or in a CoMEL project. So you can be an implementing partner, you can be a community leader, or you can be various groups within the community. So we are going to position ourselves as different members of the community in Malindi, and we are going to think about indicators. So I'll give everybody a minute to be able to read this scenario, and then we'll move. Delphina, you should have received an invite now to reach the French group. Okay, has everybody had a chance to read this now? It's a fairly short scenario. Great. So what we're going to be doing now is that I highlighted a piece here, which was really the goal of the project and what we are trying to do here so that we kind of can keep this in mind. It already says who we are as a participant. I would encourage you to think of yourself as one of the participants that you see listed here. I think it would be helpful as we try and think about indicators. We are working with a slight disadvantage here because normally the way we would go about in CoMEL is that we would start with the community and we would try and understand from the community, what do they want to tackle? What is the issue that they want to tackle? What is the vision that they have, right? And then from that, we would identify what is it that we would be doing in the program. And once we have that program designed with the community, we would begin to ask them, well, how are we going to think about success? And what do we want to learn when we monitor? So the next step would have been the learning questions. So we would have designed, the theory of change with the community, which was the last session that we did. And then we would have moved on to really think about the learning questions. Now, we don't have time to do the learning questions and then move to the indicators. So in this case, we are working with that slight disadvantage that we are not going through the exercise of drafting the learning questions with the community. Rather, we are coming straight to the indicators or the signs of success. So if this is the goal of the project in Malindi community, which is that we want to empower the community to collaboratively address health issues, prioritize solutions, and implement a comprehensive health improvement plan that is tailored to the community's unique needs and challenges. What kind of indicators or signs of success are we looking at? How would we begin to think about success in this context? Feel free to unmute, speak up. Are you able to see the screen when I'm typing, or are you still just seeing the scenario?
I'm seeing the screens that you are typing on.
Yeah, I
Oh, yeah.
can see it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so now let's begin to think about indicators. So we've seen the project. Think about what would success look like? And we may want to keep this in mind. Just this first set. Let's ignore the second set for now. This is what we are thinking about. Indicators, when we're thinking indicators. Yes. Yes, Stella.
Gunjan, mine is like a question. In a
Okay.
community-led M&A process,
Mm-hmm.
setting indicator is an integral part of the whole theory of change process, where we start with like the precondition or the things that they want to achieve, and then based on that, they identify where they are and then how to measure that. It's a continuous process. So can we do it in a separate way like we are doing now? Practically, is it really community-led if you do it this way with communities, like talking about indicators sometimes, then identifying the learning questionnaire service, or it comes out of the whole process, like the vision, the goal development exercise. So that is what I want to be clear on.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's what we said at the beginning. The unfortunate reality is that when we can only do a session 2 hours at a time, we are not able to do everything together. And so we've had to break this up. And the break, we realize that this is artificial, but it's just that we only have 2 hours. So the last session that we had was about the theory of change. How do you create a theory of change with the community? And that's what we did in our last session. We worked at creating a theory of change with the community. So this time we are assuming that now we already have a theory of change with the community. We have a goal and objective. We have learning questions that we have developed with the community. So now we are beginning to think about indicators. So you're right, it's a process that we do with the community, but it's just for the purposes of this exercise, we are breaking it up. Yes, Ogenye. Ogenye.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Ogenye Morris from Uganda. Looking at the goal to empower the Malindi community to collectively address. One of the indicators that we'll come out with is reduced cases of ill health among the Malindi community members. Hello, can you?
Yes, we can hear you again. Yeah. So I'm writing what you said. Reduce cases of health among the community members. Fantastic. That's a great start.
Then two, to also increased household income as a result of reduced expenditure on health-related issues.
Okay. Thank you. I think those are great starting points. And thank you for being brave and starting us off. That's the most difficult thing to do. So a couple of questions I think I would encourage us to think about. Let's take the first thing that again you brought up, reduce cases of ill health among community members. Excellent. If I'm a community member, what does good health mean for me? It means I don't have to go to the doctor. I'm not falling sick, right? So that's exactly how a community member would think about it. Now, how can we make this more specific or measurable? So where would we find this information, for instance? Yeah, Shitala.
Yeah, as a community member, maybe the community member may say like the money spent on health issues, like for to get medical services, those can be an indicator. The other is the number of people going to clinic or hospital if it is NSA, or number of people seeking support from herbal kind of what you call doctors in the community, and also number of people who can engage in community levels. You know, they know who is strong and who is weak in the society. Maybe number of days in a year, or like that. So they, when they reflect on the situation of the communities in that area, I think those are the areas that they may reflect. That's how I look at it.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
So great. I think let's again look at the first indicator. So again, you suggested reduced number of cases of ill health, and Yeshitala, suggested one way of looking at that could be the number of people who are visiting clinic and traditional doctors. Excellent. Is there a possibility that people are going to clinic and health traditional doctors, especially clinics, more, not just because they are falling ill, but for preventive purposes, because they are now better informed and they know when to go for doctors and clinics? Do we think that's a possibility? Yeah, Florence.
Sorry for coming up. I think this is an indicator, you know, when we start the project, we set this, and then if the number reduces as we implement the project, that is the signs that the project is bringing change, or the people can identify solutions for this problem, what they can do. Is it, what is the cause of this, or, and then the people may start working on that, and then again, next time or after a year, when we measure the number of either the money spent or the number of people going to clinic or traditional healers, is that's reduced. I think that is how we see whether we are bringing impact or not.
Right. Thank you, Ashla. I'm going to move to Florence, but I think the intention of my question, what we're trying to do is we're trying to replicate a little bit of what the process can look like, right? So we'll start with community members. They'll tell us how they would look at what is their sign of success. And then we're trying to see how do we make the sign of success measurable, observable? How can you know, how's it responsive? Is it going to make sense? Can there be other factors which make this indicator not really tell us what that sign of success truly is? So that's the process we are going through right now. Florence.
Thank you very much. In our scenario, we are given, we are looked at obesity and diabetes and mental health. If we are to be specific, I'm thinking that we would come up with indicators to address these issues which we saw in the scenario.
Okay, thanks, Lawrence.
Yes.
So again, number of people. So are you suggesting that instead of just saying number of people going to clinic or traditional doctors, we can actually look at number of people going to the clinic and traditional doctors for problems related to obesity, diabetes, and mental health? Is that what you're suggesting?
I would suggest that we reduce the cases of obesity, we reduce the cases of diabetes and mental health cases. Then we look at how we are going to be smart, so that but the scenario did not give us how many cases, so we will not be smart enough to say from this to this, but at least our indicators should point on the cases which we have read in the scenario.
Right. Thank you, Florence. So again, what I hear you saying is basically,
yes,
if our goal is to reduce the number of cases of obesity, diabetes, and mental health, then one way of looking at finding that out is if our indicator measures the number of cases, right?
Yes.
And when we measure that, we can have
and
a baseline.
Also put in a time frame. Yes.
Time frame. Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. Barry.
Yeah, I mean, just following up on your question, Gunjan, about and raising the question, the possibility that more people might be going for preventative care, and that would be a positive sign.
Right.
And actually then building on what Florence was just saying, I mean, I think that you could just simply have an indicator of the indicators like Florence was just talking about. You could also have a count of distinguishing the number of visits with a category that has to do with preventative care and seeing that as a positive indicator. So if it should be relatively easy to be able to distinguish between those, but that might require then working with clinics and hospitals to make that distinction in their records if they don't already.
Perfect. Thank you, Barry. You actually take us to the next set of things that we had here, which is that once we begin to come up with indicators and we've made them measurable and a little specific, how do we decide what, which indicators do we prioritize? And that depends on four things: our capacity to measure, the importance of the objective, the cost to measure, and the effort and time to collect data. So Barry, I think that's what you were referencing, that, well, it would require alignment with clinics and working with them, but it's actually not that difficult to measure, right? So in this
Right.
case, it seems we could look at preventive care and how many are going for treatment. So how many are actually going for treatment versus how many are going for preventive care? Because especially for something like mental health, you actually want people to go in and seek support. Fantastic. Thank you. I think the one more thing I would ask is to go back to the first thing that again you brought us to, and then Yashtala helped us to narrow down a little bit, which is how much money are people spending on health issues or to get medical services. Now that's a very specific indicator that we have. There was another indicator, which is the number of days in a year that people report that they are sick. So when we think of indicators, there are two kinds of indicators, right? There are individual indicators, and a lot of what we've been talking about is individual level indicators. How many days are people sick? How much is a household expenditure? So individual household level. There are also community level indicators. And one of the community level indicators could be what the first indicator we talked about, which is the number of people going to a clinic, right? Seeking care, preventative or seeking treatment. Now that's a community level indicator. Are there any other community level indicators that we want to look at? So again, think of yourselves as community members. What does it look like for you? What change would you see in your community if we were to succeed with the goal of this project? Are we thinking of organizing capacity? Sorry, Barry.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, these are a little bit more, these are softer indicators. They're harder to measure, but some indicator of community awareness of health issues. And that could be done in various ways through meetings or surveys, although that can get time consuming and expensive. But, something that has to do with health education and how much more do people understand about diabetes than they did before, and what the preventative measures might be. And so those kinds of indicators are going to be important. And I'm trying, and I haven't quite figured out how you would do it. I'm particularly interested in the process, dialogic processes and that sort of thing in community. So how would we want to look at the quality of the health education and those kind of processes in which people are engaged in making decisions about not only their own family's health, but the health generally of the community?
Mm-hmm.
That's hard to identify right now, but it would take a little time. Yeah.
Right. But awareness is something we can look at, right? So if I'm a community member, I would probably say, well, one measure is that how much do I actually know about health issues? How much do I actually know when I should go to care? And how much, I think another measure probably if I'm a community member could be that, I don't know, I would want to know how much access do I have, right? So how responsive to care is the health clinic, for instance, to these issues and to my problems? Because if I'm a community member, I care about the quality of care I get. Don't I? Okay, we have about 30 seconds left. People will start coming in here. Yashtala, I'm going to come to you. I just want to see if anyone wants to share in the main room in a minute,
Hello,
anything if they
can I
thought
chip in?
different. Yes, Florence.
If we can look at accessibility and maybe we look at the health seeking behaviors of community members, and then how the accessibility.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yashatala.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was looking at it.
what I want to add is like knowledge of the causes of that particular illness, to what level the people knows the cause, and also the signs and the symptoms, and get the medical support. So that is what I want to add.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. I am going to stop share. I see people are coming back into the room. If anyone from my group would want to share anything that they saw challenging, because we didn't either challenging or surprising about the exercise, we didn't get to identifying who would do that. But Ronald and Given, over to you.
Can you please set up the translation, please?
Oh, Sarah. Ronald, Given.
Great.
Yes.
Everyone, I hope you had a nice experience in your rooms. So I think we can begin with the French team. Just tell us, so I think the French team was working on the indicators. So can we hear what was challenging or surprising doing this exercise?
Yes. For the French group, I have the mandate from the group to share with you what was surprising, exciting here. This is a journey, open-ended process, and we are encouraged to explore. So you start a journey, but you know where you begin. You start it, but you don't know where it ended. It could end. This is surprising and exciting as well. But we have also some remarks, and we would like the reaction of those who facilitate the session. We wonder if during the presentation, the frame for learning question and indicator has been really shared. We wonder if we could not really support learning if we share at least one indicator, one learning question that we could criticize and look at if it's relevant according to what has been shared, and the same for indicators. The third thing that I would like to share is the learning question come in a continuum to the indicators. If we have express right learning question, I say right like this, the indicator could be easy to formulate. So there is a link between learning question and indicator. Okay. Those are 3 points that we would like to share. Thank you. And for the
thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
This, okay, great.
I pass
So I
it
think
over
that,
to Sarah.
Great. Sarah, do you want to say something?
I don't have anything to add. That was a great summary, Pascal. Thanks so much. We have a long list of indicators, but we didn't get to prioritize them yet.
Did you have a chance to prioritize any of those?
No,
we didn't. Yeah, thank you.
No, given, can we
So I
move
think
to
we can move to the next group. Gujan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say maybe the learning questions group, if you want to share. Because there was just one group doing learning questions.
Yeah. So Amelia was going to be our respondent. Amelia, could you go ahead? Unmute.
Hi. Yes.
What was surprising? Yes, we hear you, Amelia. Go ahead.
Thank you. So what was surprising in doing this exercise, it was the idea of looking for engagement and the participation of everyone in collecting all ideas to discover the diversity of perspectives that emerged during the exercise. And other things was the personal insights and the related experience that we shared. Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia. Gunjan?
Thanks, John. I think the next group was Kevin's group, which also did indicator. Kevin, was there, who's reporting from your group?
Kevin?
You're muted if you're speaking, Kevin. Okay, Kevin seems to be muted. We don't have anyone from his group. From my group, does anyone want to share out? So anything that was surprising or challenging for us? We did not appoint a rapporteur. So. No volunteers. I'll just quickly say then, and I think in our group, one important point that was raised was exactly what Pascal said, the French group said, which is that, you know, the whole process of developing the theory of change with the community, the learning questions and indicators, it's so interconnected that to just pick up one part of it and piecemeal and work on indicators, I think that was challenging for us. Barry.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to add a challenge that we didn't actually talk about, but that I've been thinking about throughout most of this workshop, which is, and this is something that we all, I know, are aware of and confront, but it's the challenge of finding the balance, so to speak, or being able to navigate through, on one hand, the indicators or the learning questions and indicators that come from genuine community dialogue, along with, depending on what your funding sources are, the expectations, external expectations of certain kinds of indicators. And that depends on the situation, and that depends on how you can navigate. And the other is, in the process of actually sitting down with the community and generating the learning questions and then indicators, is the challenge of identifying indicators. It's hard. It's hard to even sort of identify what the tension there is. But those of us who are sitting around doing this exercise have a fair amount of experience with the more traditional kind of MEL and the identification of indicators that we think are going to work, and that actually show success. That can be a challenge in certain kinds of communities in terms of helping people understand what indicators are. I don't mean this in a top-down kind of way. I'm just saying that sometimes that's a challenge, and it's part of our commitment as people who believe in community-led development that we really confront that challenge and genuinely seek dialogue around these kind of issues. I don't know if that, hopefully that makes some sense, but.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it does.
Yeah.
Is there another group we are missing?
We're missing one
Thanks.
group, Kevin's group, and I don't
Yeah.
know if Lansana is Lansana, are you the were you in the indicator group?
Yeah, we are in the
Yes.
indicator group, myself and Amana and Kelvin. We are, of course, we are a lot of indicators that came up, but we try to prioritize. And we discussed about the capacity and also the effort and time, the cost. But at the end of the day, we prioritize and we'll talk about engagement or the outreach. And also we talk about the acceptance rates. And we try to scale them and see as to how we should be able to scale. For example, we suggest, based on the indicator, we said the level of acceptance by the community people, the rate. We try to put some figures that will translate the acceptance rates. So because of there were issues, cost attached, and all of these things, so we prioritize few of them.
Thank you. I see a hand. Okay, I think it's. Yeah,
Given
so,
all
yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
We've done report outs from all the groups now, so.
Yeah, great. So I think that, the experiences and challenges that you have all reported are genuine. And I think that, this exercise just gives you a sneak peek of really what happens. The truth is, and as Barry mentioned, it's really a challenge, and really thinking about, are these indicators and learning questions from the community, or are they in a subtle way being driven by a donor or someone who is powerful out there facilitating the process? And I think that it's very important to think about this process very carefully if you really want to get the best out of the process. Who is facilitating? I think that some community members have to facilitate. And some examples that I'm going to give you in Kenya that we've worked with, we have community-based organizations facilitating the process. And because these are people who are part of the community, who are respected by the community, and so when they are facilitating the process, everyone in the community feels open to contribute and be open. But also what we've realized is that within communities, in Zambia, we did discover that within communities, there are power differences. And so what you want to do is to further disaggregate these communities into groups where they feel so comfortable to bring out these learning questions and indicators. And then each group further validates these research questions and indicators. So it's a process, it's an iterative process. I think you have to keep on going forth and back and ensure that they're really representative of the voice of the community. And beginning with the visioning exercise really helps, because the visioning exercise on its own begins to fish out the questions, begins to fish out the indicators that you can begin to rephrase so that they really sound like indicators. Yeah, I think in summary, that's what I can say. But I think we need to just talk a little bit about prioritizing the indicators. If we move to that slide.
Just a minute, given. I'm sharing the slide now. All right, so.
And then given just a time check, you have about 10 minutes. And then we need to be doing the close to tell people what's next. So.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I think that this whole process, for me, whether you're looking at learning questions or indicators, you really need to believe in the concept of less is more. I think focus on learning questions that are representative of the objectives, what you want to achieve, including with your indicators, focus on, are these indicators really representative of what we are trying to measure here? Now, once you develop indicators, and it's always nice that you develop a pool of indicators that you believe are representative and important to your objective. And the process of beginning to prioritize them is to create a grid. And I'll speak about that a little bit. And this grid, you have to think about matrices that you want to measure. And one of the things that we strongly encourage people at the community level is to think about their capacity to measure the indicator. When you're dealing with community-led monitoring, evaluation, and learning, it's a little bit very different with traditional, because in COM, you are empowering the community. And so the community has to have the level of capacity to ensure they are able to track their own indicators going forward when you are not there. And so thinking about their level of capacity is important. And so when you begin to prioritize which indicator, it has to be an indicator that the community feels they have the capacity to measure. And that means the skill. They know that they have the skill and the tools that they can use to measure that indicator. And they can rate that. Next, they have to think about this indicator relative to the objective of what they want to achieve. Are the indicators important to the objective that we want to achieve? Or is the indicator representative enough of what we want to achieve? Again, that is very important to use as a criteria for beginning to prioritize your indicator. The next is to think about the feasibility. Okay, and in feasibility, you're talking about cost. Yes, you may have the capacity to measure that indicator. You may find the indicator is representative to the objective, but begin to think about the cost related to measuring that indicator. Do you have resources to measure that indicator? You know, recently I was doing an evaluation that required measuring children's wasting, height, and everything. And the organization didn't have any measuring tools. And we were supposed to measure about 2,000 children, and they were stuck. And they didn't have the money in the budget to begin to measure that. So it's important to think, in as much as the indicator is important, but to think about, how do we measure it? Is there another way we can get a proxy measure of that? Also think about the time. How long does it take for you to measure the indicator? including maturation of some indicators. Some indicators you can begin to see their maturation within weeks, some within months, some within a year. So thinking about all this is extremely important when you are prioritizing indicators. Next slide. So this is what you can actually do. You can categorize the criteria into two, what we call capacity-based and cost-based. And you can rank them on a scale of 0 to 3. So the way it is that when you're looking at the costs or effect-based, they are rated in an inverse manner, okay? So 0 to 3 is high, in telling that, so you prioritize that, it's high because it means that it has lower cost. And when you're looking at a scale of 4 to 7, that is medium in terms of cost. And when you're talking of 8 to 10, that's low, right? So they're inverse. So you can look at them in capacity, look at the capacity side and the cost side. And this process, it's actually important that you do this process with all your stakeholders at community level. When you are rating them, think about the views and the voices of everyone in the community so that the ratings that come out are really a representativeness of the community. So I'm going to show you in the next slide how we use this. And so we do everything in Excel. I think it helps. So you can do conditional formattings as you are entering the numbers. You can actually see these colors coming up. Next slide.
Given, I think there is a hand, there might be a question or a concern from Yeshitala.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. My question, when we say about the cost, I'm just thinking about the difference between the conventional M&A method and the community-led. As to my understanding is concerned, when we talk about community-led M&A, it is a community who are working together, set an indicator, baseline, and the target so they can measure. So we can take that measurement. And for me, it is a kind of it is very cost effective, whatever the indicator is, since it is a community who measures themselves those indicators. And the other thing is in terms of like, when we choose like only the indicators that we can measure, the simple indicators, are we not missing what is important and an important change in the community? So how can we address that? That's my question, maybe if you have time.
And Given, can I just add something to Yeshitala's question? I think the other
Yes.
question I would ask is that when we say that is it measurable or is it important to measure, important for whom and measurable according to whom, right? Because the standards of what is considered measurable and specific very often are determined by certain ways, certain schools of thought, and it may be different in a community. So I'll just add that to Yeshitala's question.
Perfect. So yes, I think community-led M&E is more cost-effective. However, when you are dealing with communities, and this is why we always have a facilitator, is that sometimes, you know, they will have an indicator without thinking about, and this is why I want to show you a practical example. This went into the community, they discussed about it, they developed these indicators, and then when we told them to prioritize, they realized they didn't have the capacity to do it. And it's like one community wants to build a school, and they start well, and they realize they don't have money to buy iron sheets. And the school remains with the physical structure lacking iron sheets. So it's about the whole process of prioritizing. It's about sparking dialogue and thinking about, okay, yes, it is costly. Where are we going to get the money? The community has to think about that. If they don't know where to get the money, they have to rethink their indicator. When you're saying measurable is the way we conceptualize it here is how do the community think they'll measure this indicator? Using what tool? Do they have the capacity to develop that tool or to access that tool? That is what measurable is. So the community, when they begin visioning, they vision what they want. The ultimate vision is their goal or objective. And so when we begin to ask them, is this indicator relevant to your goal? So importance is now relative to their visioned goal. So when we are asking them, how important is it? It's towards the visioning. So the way we begin this process in the examples that I'll show you, it all begins with visioning. The community themselves vision what they want. They then prioritize all the problems that they've identified and then say, this is where we want to go. And that's our goal. So every indicator that we develop has to relate to their goal. And that is the importance. Think about the importance of these indicators.
Given, can I add one or two thoughts there?
Yes.
One, yes, responding to a colleague, I think from Ethiopia, when we talk about cost as well and what we have experienced out in the field, you can say, yes, community members are responsible for data gathering. However, we realize some of the geographies, the households are sparsely populated. They might need at least a bicycle to really visit. Although there might be community volunteers, there could be members from the community-based organizations, but there's reality on the ground. They might be moving from one particular angle of the village and to the other. Do they have drinking water? You know, how are they going to what kind of mechanism are they going to use as a means of transport there? Maybe a bicycle, yes, but that bicycle might require maintenance. So we're not saying cost in terms of, high cost, even at the community level, being community members, and we believe that not each and everyone will be able to gather data. There's a group that will be identified themselves as members who are gathering data, whereby capacity strengthening will happen in this particular group, and they'll represent the community in doing that, that particular aspect. So that's what I think that's very critical. But again, just also adding to what Given said in terms of, whose standards, what do we mean by measurable? I think the vision process, and I think as we're starting, we also talked about defining success. It's according to that community's standard. How do they define success? What do they want to see at the end of the day? Do they want to see a structure without roofing? Do they want to see a structure that is having a roofing that is safe, the safe and security for their children? If this is where they aim, that is where they aim. That's the standard that they are setting, and they don't want to go below that standard. So whatever they think through about what they want to measure, looking at those particular standards, they really need to make sure that they are really reaching there. If they cannot reach there due to probably not having resources or capacity, then they need to think through what else can we do to navigate that. Back to you, Kevin. Given, sorry.
Also, Kevin, just a very quick times check. If you can wind up in a minute or so, we just want to make sure that we finish on time.
Great. So what I have here is an example of this exercise that a youth initiative in Kenya did. So they came up with their indicators with the communities. And next, we asked them to go back to their communities, reflect on these indicators, and rank them based on the criteria that I gave you, and send it back to us so that we then sit down with them and think about it. So you can actually see, so I've just flashed out some indicators among the many indicators that they have. So the first indicator you can see, it's so remember, it moves from the score of 0 to 10. 0, it means that they have no capacity. And as it moves to 10, they have the capacity and it's important to their objective. And so it's around 6.5, and that's why the green is light green. But when you look at the cost, it's very expensive. And remember, this indicator is percent of, and it means that they have to do a survey, a big survey. So one of the things that we did discussing with them is that, look, this is a very costly thing for you. Do you know where you can get the money to continue doing? They said no. And we said, look, you can actually get insight about a sense of belonging by actually conducting focus group discussions rather than doing a survey, because it's still very important, but you don't have the resources, the time to actually collect data on it. So this is how we ended up agreeing with them. So rather than conducting a survey, which they will not be able to do going forward, is that they will be collecting just opinions and perceptions of the youth on their sense of belonging. And then the next ones, we can actually see that they are rated very low. First of all, they are very costly, but very low ratings on importance to the objectives. So one other things we mentioned is that these can either be dropped, or again, they can turn them into qualitative indicators if they go back and rethink about them. I think I'll end here.
Thank you so much, Given. Appreciate it. Big thank you to Given, Ronald, Kevin, and Justin for really taking us through this session. I think not only did we normally, at the end of the session, we always look at, well, the question we always ask ourselves are, so what did we need to unlearn, or what do we need to unlearn to be able to do this? And we were not able to specifically get to that question today, but I think you did, help us walk through a lot of the issues. And to me, what was very interesting from what you just said, Given, and the question that Yashitala asked actually was that this is about the collaboration. In many ways, CoMEL is about the collaboration between communities and practitioners, or, us, community-based organizations, local organizations, evaluators, or even international organizations. But what we need to unlearn is how it was always us in the driving seat. We need to unlearn that, and we need to learn that our role is exactly, as you said, to be a facilitator, to maybe enable the community to spark some questions and discussions, but to let the community lead in terms of what it wants to measure, how it wants to measure it, and what would be its modes of collecting information and engaging with each other. So thank you for that. We will be sharing out the recording of this session. We will be sharing out the slide deck from this session, and it will also be on our website where we have everything curated on the CoMEL series. So we've now done 4 things in the CoMEL series. Starting from MEL 101, we've come all the way to defining the learning questions and indicators. What we will be doing next would be looking at the question of sampling and data collection. How does that look different in CoMEL vis-a-vis traditional MEL? What does that look like, and how do you do that with the community? Again, keeping in mind that not only is the community in the driver's seat when it comes to CoMEL, but the community is the one that also has ownership. So one thing that I forgot to actually mention at the beginning, but one of the critical things, starting points for CoMEL, is not just in terms of who decides what to do, but also who owns the information, the knowledge that emerges from this process. And to always remember that it is the community. If we can go to the next slide. Do we have a next slide? Yes. So for now, we will announce the date soon for the CoMEL, for the next call on CoMEL, which will be on sampling strategy, as I said, and data collection. We do have our next monthly global call on the 27th of March. And next week, we actually have the leadership development calls. They are going to be restarted. We had paused them for a little bit, but we are restarting them. And Sarah, can you remind us when the leadership call is next week? Is it the 20th?
It's March 20th. Yeah, it's March 20th at 9 a.m. Eastern, which is 1 p.m. GMT.
Thank you so much. So those are the two calls that we have coming up. Again, thank you so much for your participation. If any of you are interested in facilitating, leading, or sharing, or being part of the next session, which is on sampling strategy and data collection, please reach out to Nelly. Nelly, my colleague, has been co-facilitating the Unlearning Labs for a long time. She hasn't been able to join us today, but do reach out to her or me. I will put the email IDs on chat. And again, a huge thank you to Ronald, Given, Kevin, and Justin for all your help today in helping us to rethink about how we think about learning questions and signs of success. Ronald first mentioned the term signs of success to me when we did talking indicators. And he was like, well, the community does not think in terms of indicators. It thinks in terms of, maybe success, signs of success, or what they want to change. So can we find a term or a word that speaks to that? So thank you. I think that was my own learning, how I had picked up and was still using some of these terms. So it has been a wonderful experience working with everybody here. To all the participants, you raised some very important questions in the breakout rooms, in the main sessions. Thank you. And thank you, Paul, our interpreter, who enabled us to make this, to bring our Francophone colleagues into the discussion. Also, a big thank you to all the facilitators and to Sarah, who has quietly behind the scenes been managing this entire call. And a big thank you to everyone.
Thank
We
you.
have a tradition at MCLD. We all unmute and say goodbye together.
Bye.
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 And thank you,
Bye.
Gunjan.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Alla prochaine.
Bye.
Bye
Merci
bye bye.
beaucoup.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Au revoir.
Bye, bye, bye.
Au revoir. Au revoir. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Aya.
Bye,
Au
Sarah.
revoir.
How are you?
Merci
Apa,
beaucoup.
Abah?
Merci beaucoup, beaucoup. Merci
Merci à
beaucoup.
tous. Merci beaucoup. Ouais.
Normal ko ni ko?
Voilà.
Mi ficha ka ko ni pa.
Oui, au revoir.
Okay. Bye.